turning out for decrepit ancient rubbish, it turns out, veteran rubbish. But of course you know that at the moment we're in the midst of the Great British Spring Clean, organised by the Keep Britain Tidy campaign, and in aid of that, Peter and I are going to present some of the rubbish found within Bodleian's collections, ancient and modern. Peter's going to start and then I'm going to finish up. So I'm not going to do an introduction particularly, but to hand over to Peter.
Thank you very much. There's only one sentence I would like to say. It's that this talk had a specific purpose as an apology, especially for my family, I have to say, who always mock me for leaning over rubbish bins, and this is a justification of why this could be important. So let's start off with the first one. This is one of the most precious pieces of rubbish in the Bodleian Library, and it is now a treasure for various reasons. This is probably the first thing that came out of the history's most famous and important rubbish heap in Oxyrhynchus in Middle Egypt, where there was a capital of that province of Egypt, Oxyrhynchus, quite a big city, nothing left of it, except for the rubbish heaps outside the city walls. And two Oxford scholars, Grenfell and Hunt from Queen's College, just around the corner, they started their first campaign. They got to know each other during a hike somewhere in this country, and they decided, let's do some fun. So they went to Oxyrhynchus, they started digging the graves, they didn't find anything, and they said, okay, let's start digging the rubbish. And first find, it was hundreds and hundreds and thousands of papyrus fragments. And this here is probably the first one that came out of the sand. And it was a particularly important one. It is a page of a bound book, a codex, written in Greek, probably from the late 2nd, early 3rd century, so around 200 AD. And it is an alternative gospel. So it is what they call the collection of sayings. So Jesus said this, new stories. Scholars think that this is the most ancient, the oldest layer of the gospel, when it's the sayings of Christ which are collected here. And this was written in very early in the 3rd century. You can see it's like a catalogue of sayings, nothing else. And it was the first thing that they published of the Oxyrhynchus find. So I have the first publication of the papyrus fragments, and it starts with this. And they wanted this to be the fundraiser of the campaign, and it worked really well. So they managed to dig up 450,000 fragments from this rubbish heap, which serves like 70% of the newly found literary pieces from ancient classical Greek literature. So it's very remarkable. They are here in the Ancient Art and Architecture Library in Oxford, and the publication is going ahead. Out of the 450,000, they published 7,000. So there is still work to do. But this is the opening piece. So this was a decisive thing. This started the whole publication and the exploration of fragments. The other thing is a less hilarious one, but comes from Oxyrhynchus. This is not from the rubbish heap of fragments, but this is from the rubbish heap of household waste. They found, extraordinary find, they found a glass of wine, which still had wine in it. It was a glass with a cork. So, of course, the first thing you would do is you want to taste that wine. So they took out the cork, and they realized that the cork is actually has something around it folded up. And they folded the thing up, and it was this piece, which served as the cork of the wine bottle. And when they unfolded it, it turned out that this is verse, hexametric Greek poetry. Okay, they started to look for what it could be. It's nothing of the most well-known pieces, and they found a reference to it in a work by Athenaius from the 2nd century, who says that that was quite a rubbish piece of poetry, written to honor and praise the Emperor Hadrian, whose boyfriend died a while ago, and there was a new flower found in Egypt, and that was an unknown color. And the poet of this piece proposed that this should be named after the boyfriend, Antinoe's flower. And then she wrote a whole poem in hexametric verse about that, presented it to the emperor, and he got his reward for it. He got lifelong membership, full catering in the Library of Alexandria for the rest of his life. So it was worth it. But Athenaeus says, puts a note to it, that the poetry was not very good. I know the guy, and I think he quotes some lines from the poetry which miraculously match with this fragment. So this fragment is actually a fragment of the long poem written by this guy Pancrates. And the condition of the circumstances of his finding, actually, it shows how they regarded it. So it was really not the best piece of poetry, but this cork in the wine bottle served this unknown piece by Pancrates, which actually gave him lifelong membership in the Library of Alexandria. So not bad. The other piece is triple rubbish. So this piece is from the same period, actually, 2nd century, under the Emperor Hadrian, and this is a marriage contract, and a long papyrus sheet with very long, exceptionally long lines. And this is a contract between the father of the woman and the husband. So the woman has almost no say about this, and they agree about the conditions of the marriage. And it has a very interesting catalogue of things the woman brings into the marriage. So we have an insight into her wardrobe, that she has a very nice brooch, a necklace with green stones and included, and her entire wardrobe is listed. How beautiful color, the wedding dresses, and so on. And there are some regulations about divorce and death, a typical marriage contract, which was submitted for recording to the local archive. And for some reason, and we don't know why, it was considered as rubbish because someone in the archive turned it around and put a new text on the back of the marriage contract, which is an extraordinary survival. This is the new cataloguing rules of the Library of Alexandria. Why would you put that on the back of a marriage contract? We don't know. I've read the entire literature. We don't know. But this is a reply to some mischief which they did in the Library of Alexandria around contracts. Someone tampered with the contracts, and the governor issued new rules that contracts cannot be lent to anyone. And there was a new library, which they call the Library of Hadrian, which was founded in the city to oversee the entire recording of the archives. So there were two libraries in Alexandria to house the contracts, and the Library of Hadrian was to oversee the entire archival records. And these are instructions to the librarians that do not let anyone take anything away from the library. No contracts should even be shown to anyone without the explicit written permission of the lead archivist of the Library of Alexandria. And then there is an appendix to it where the governor, Titus Flavianus, says explicitly, I know that some librarians did not keep the new rules. So I would like you to know anyone who breaks the rules will be severely punished. So nothing should be lent to anyone from the library. And then an appendix is given to it, and that's the local Oxyrhynchus archivist who is sending this whole thing to his colleague Horion. We know his name, Apollonius. He said, look how frightening the new rules are. I suggest we keep it as it is. And that's the appendix, and before that, the whole thing. All the rules collected by probably Apollonius. But we don't know why this thing was written on the back of a marriage contract. And then discarded in the rubbish heap of Oxyrhynchus. This is another type of rubbish, monastic. I selected this Coptic collection of manuscript leaves from the White Monasteries in Upper Egypt, which represents an entire rubbish bin of unused manuscripts, just leaves packed on each other, waiting for recycling in various ways, in a rubbish room of the monastery, which must have been a great place. And this German Coptologist went there in 1810, and he managed to convince the monks to sell him the rubbish. That was one of the greatest bargains, actually. And we have 5 volumes of this, where some of remarkable survivals of Coptic literature are preserved. Some of them illustrated, illuminated, lost lives of saints and translations from Greek. And you can see the charm of rubbish. Every single piece is different, from 7th century to 10th century. And this is what a rubbish room may have looked like in a white monastery in Egypt. And this is where I will give it over to Andrew.
Thank you. Well, you might as well go home now. We're not going to top that, though we have got starring librarians as well. So I'm going to look, moving from the ancient world, coming through to the 20th century. And I'm just going to want to look at rubbish, in particular waste paper, at 2 points, the 2 world wars. Now, when we proposed this, I was thinking about, why we've got to say that this is important, though of course, in our current situation we know that the supply of materials in wars becomes severely disruptive. So I'm going to start with fantastic guard book of paper specimens put together in 1915, and we have a letter from the controller of Oxford University Press. Any Oxford University Press authors here, cover your ears, to Faulkner Madden, who is the librarian of the Bodleian in March 1917, and sending a sample of paper that they've made at Wolvercott Mill using 10% waste sheets from books about 100 years old, so presumably unsold OUP stock getting pulped. And he explains how it's not worked. You've ended up with a kind of alphabet spaghetti. You can see bits of type in the paper. It's not suitable for producing new paper for printing on. And he explains that it would be fine if they'd been making coloured papers or brown papers. And then in an aside he says, your idea about Bodleian reader's slips won't quite work, but if you gather them up, we can send them off with our printed waste to a brown paper mill. So if you can find brown paper known to be made in late 1917, 1918, there may be a small quantity of Bodleian reader slips in each. So that's what's happening in the First World War, and there were very detailed instructions on paper salvage, how paper was sold. There was maximum prices that could be paid, registrations for it. I'm not going into all of that. However, by the time we get to the outbreak of the Second World War, the next thing I want to show you is from a guard book of memoranda and things sent out by the British Records Association, founded in 1932 for archivists, record managers, and this is a small poster that was to be put up in libraries around paper salvage, and I'm going to read a couple of fantastic quotes from it. During the War of 1914-18, indiscriminate destruction resulted in the loss not only of rare pamphlets and early newspapers, but also irreplaceable manuscripts and records. So they were aware that a lot had been lost in the paper salvage drives of the First World War. And who are the heroes in this tale? Librarians, of course. They're putting this up and saying, bring your salvage that you're questioning about, bring it to librarians, and they'll check to see whether any of this should be retained. And they say, it'll only be a small proportion of what would go into paper salvage. So this is at the start of the Second World War, rising into action. So what I want to do really, what I should have said is I'm going to look at this through the waste hierarchy of reduce, reuse and recycle. So this is the end of it, the recycling. What happens when you can't do anything else with the paper? Quickly looking at reduce and recycling. So reduce, in the Second World War, publishers were allowed a quota of paper based on their usage over the year ending 31st of April 1939. Originally 60% of that quota, and then by 1942 that had dropped to 37.5%. So what's the resulting effect? And for this I've had to bring in a couple of my own things, because what the Bodleian doesn't have is dust jackets. So I'm going to start off with 1942 Dorothy Sayers book, which it does what it says on the tin, or in this case, the dust jacket. Cheap war edition on thin paper. And what does thin paper and cheap war edition mean? Well, it's 1942 book again, Britain Needs Paper, goes through exactly what happens. The book, War Economy Standard, and they've got the logo on the title. And then I've opened it below, showing you the very strict rules about type size, amount of type, leading, density of type to page, and thicknesses of paper that's allowed, and also thicknesses of board that's used in the binding. So it's this reducing what's being used for publication. So, and then just to end up with recycling, so reusing rather, so you can reduce, then you can reuse. And I've started off here with, again, this is the dust jacket for Britain Needs Books. I'm just going to turn it over now to show that it's printed on the back of a map. So here we have Scottish map produced sometime after 1870 up to the war, so they're recycling one-sided paper. And this isn't a one-off. This is the star find from our colleagues in the map room. So here we have, let me get you the details. So a map of Oldenburg in Lower Saxony, northwest Germany. So it's printed in February 1945 by the Geographical Section of the General Staff of the War Office. But it's a copy of a pre-war German map. So this is as the push west through Europe is happening, British military reproducing German maps. But what's really exciting is this itself is printed on the back of a captured German map. So again, you see the use of paper, it's only printed on one side, can be reused again. And here it's beautifully cancelled, overprinted with cancelled. And so we've got a German map reproducing an English map, reused for an English map reproducing, or British map reproducing a German map. And then just to finish off with this, which I think, I'm trying to work out where I got this from, but I think this came from my mum. This produced in 1946, and just to, as we're again all learning, the effects of interruption of supply. So of course, paper rationing didn't end with the end of the war. It went on in some form up to 1953. So here is Plant Ecology and the School. War Economy Standard book produced in 1946. This time its dust wrapper is printed on a British map, presumably produced for possible invasion of France. It's the western Vendée, near the Loire mouth in western France. But again, and if send you like me looking at 1940s dust wrappers to see what they're printed on the back of. And I'm going to stop there.